On standard models, the double humbucker configuration wasn't really available, unless you count those weird things with too many humbuckers that I once found in the online store in Vietnam. Hello, my name is Michał and I'm on Ibbyhead. This channel is a journey to document every Ibanez guitar ever made. And today we're looking at this rather brown looking, although it's called transparent black, RG520QS. These days double humbucker configuration is super popular among Ibanez, but it took them nearly a decade from releasing the first modern RG, the RG550, to introducing like mass-produced double humbucker configuration RGs. And this was like one of the first. So let's dig into that story. The name RG means like roadstar guitar and was kind of like used for a bit before 1987. I have a video about that period. It was one of the first videos on my channel. We kind of consider the start of modern RG line with the introduction of RG550 at the NAMM in 1987. This was basically like simplified version of the Jam Steve Vai signature guitar. And it came with HSH configuration just like Jam. This is the kind of configuration that Steve Vai wanted. But they still experimented with like those superstrat configurations. So we had like soon after 560 with HSS configuration, we have 565 with HS configuration. There were some American Masters guitars with double humbuckers, and you could also order US custom with a double humbucker configuration because Japan made blank bodies with only bridge humbucker routed, and you could like pick any other configuration you want from the kind of like a order sheet. So double humbucker was also an option. But those are like extremely limited guitar. You can't really call them mass-produced. They're like on standard models, the double humbucker configuration wasn't really available, unless you count those weird things with too many humbuckers that I once found in the online store in Vietnam. Believe it or not, this is RG521. It doesn't look like it, but this is legit Fujian. All the stamps, serial numbers and so on checks out. It looks like some weird prototype. So again, shouldn't be really count as a serial model. There's probably just like few of them out there. Every now and then we discover very weird things on like Yahoo Action in Japan and so on. So, you know, there are things out there that are weird. I made fun when Ibanez introduced 521 as a part of Genesis series because it wasn't a thing in the 80s and they kind of like introduced just to have a hardtail to sell. But maybe there is something to its story actually, because there was at least one 521 made in the late 80s. So coming back to the timeline, finally in 1996 we get 3 serial production models that had a double humbucker configuration. Ash body 542H, looks like purple, but I think it's transplanted black color. That's just like badly photographed for the catalog. And then we have 2 620s, RG and RGR. One had reverse headstock. They had a bit of different switching layout than standard Ibanez. It was like more similar to JPN layout. But those models were like first truly mass-produced double humbucker configuration modern RGs. And then things kind of went on because in 1997 Ibanez introduced RG3120, the Prestige series guitar with 2 humbuckers. And this is considered one of the most beloved and the biggest cult classic in Ibanez history. So, you know, that kind of like opened the floodgate. The double humbucker configuration for RGs got accepted. And in 1986 we finally get like 500 series, so kind of like the most standard of the series at that time, the 520 and also 520QS. 520 had the plain top in a you know plain color. This has a bit of like a thin veneer of quilted sapel, wood related to mahogany, but this quilted version has like this grain that's similar to maybe like bird's eye maple or curly maple. It's like, you know, those kind of like a small curly things. Although this color, transparent black, which got a bit brownish through the, I guess, yellowing of the clear coat, doesn't really represent it very well. The blue version is probably much nicer, although they, again, through the same phenomenon, gets more greenish with time. The same year there was also a very similar guitar to this one, RG521QS. One usually indicates fixed bridge, but this one had a synchronized tremolo made by Wilkinson, so it was like not really fixed bridge, but you know, at least not double locking tremolo. And it was only made for German and Scandinavian market. They're like fairly limited numbers. I think 60 of each colors. It was also introduced the flame maple version of the 520 into the family. It was called RG520 FM. And then we had like more affordable versions like 320 FM, 320 FA with figured ash. This is actually a very interesting guitar. It's like kind of, depending on how the ash grain goes, but it's like this kind of like black grain through the red color. It's really cool. It was from the same era as my Korean RG370, and I always liked it in the catalog. All right, let's dig into nerdy stuff we like to do on this channel. So like, let's decode the name, RG520QS. RG obviously, Roadster guitar, RG series and so on. 5 for 500 series, which late 80s and throughout the 90s was kind of like a standard Japanese series. There was like, you know, there was some guitars that were like slightly better. Anything lower was kind of like usually made already outside of Japan, or maybe in some cases in Japan, but with lower specs. And this was kind of like, you know, the baseline. 20 is indication for 2 humbucker configuration in kind of like standard Ibanez naming. QS stands for quilted sapel top. Color code TK, which is transparent black. Serial number. This is F9944307. Sometime until like 97, the first letter would be like the year of the production. So, you know, if you had like F7, that would be 87, it would be F3, that would be 1993. But then in 1997, we started having like this collision, because if F starts with 7, would it be 1997 or 1887? So Ibanez introduced a new digit. So instead of like 6-digit numbers, we started having 7-digit serial numbers for Fujian guitars. And sometimes around 98, 99, they started kind of like visibly separating this like 2 digits indicating year, because a lot of people still were getting confused and kind of like consider the old naming without like, you have to like physically count the digit first if it makes sense or not. So yeah, F99, this is guitar from 1989, and 44,000 indicates rather late in the year. This is not exact science. Cool, let's talk about specs. First of all, when you grab this guitar, it strikes you how heavy it is. Usually my RGs with tremolo weigh something around 3.2 kilogram, 3.5 kilograms. I'll write the numbers in freedom units also. This weighs over 4 kilograms. So it's like, you know, 20%, 25% more heavy than usually. You can feel it. It's just big slab of mahogany. And I think even it's one piece, because I cannot find like a joint anywhere. Maybe it is there, you know, the mahogany is like longitudinally streaky, so it's actually very easy to hide the glue joint, but I don't really see one. And so maybe they found like a really heavy piece of mahogany and decided, yeah, let's do it for shit and giggles. The sapel top is like very thin. You can see it. It's like around 2-3 millimeters. You can see it on the side through the clear coat. It's really nice grain, but kind of like, you know, disappears in that color. You know, I think it's not the best color just for figured wood. It's nice. The brighter colors are probably much nicer to showcase figured wood. Standard like wood used for RGs is basswood, but there were some like ash models and mahogany models. Ibanez very early in 80s already experimented with that, so there are like some 550s discovered that are like mahogany or ash body. But generally, they did much more of those experimentation in the late 90s and in the 2000s. So for example, 3120 was mahogany body, although it was much lighter than this one. They probably picked like really nice lightweight piece of mahogany for the Prestige series. Then we have all access neck joints, normal thing at that time. It's pretty much standard since 1993-4 at Ibanez. You have 3-piece maple, bubinga, maple neck. Those necks are commonly known as bubinga striped, the late 90s kind of like 3-piece necks. They have a lot of fans in Ibanez communities. They're like one of the nicest necks in the Ibanez standard series. To be honest, I like them much more than like, you know, the OG 80s Wizards. They're still technically Wizard, but you know, this profile is a bit different among other guitars, mostly because like initially there was like no CNC, so You know, it was a lot of like just measuring by hands and so on. And I feel those early profiles are a bit like flatter, and this I like more. It's a bit more rounder. On top of that, the maple is like flamed maple here, which just makes it even nicer. Those necks are really nice. We have scarf joint mounted headstock. Technique very commonly used in Ibanez guitars. In more modern guitars, they usually just continue. They're like 3-piece or 5-piece and just attach the side wings, but doesn't really have any impact on the strength of that joint. We don't have volute, it's like very flat here. There is a rosewood fretboard, 24 frets, jumbos. We have white kind of pearloid dots in the center and also side dots. Black headstock, so no matching color. There is a white swoosh and this silverly Ibanez logo. It look like quicksilver. It kind of look like it's liquid. This is like a very typical headstock for pre-prestige Japanese Ibanez. That's how they look in the late 90s. Standard Ibanez 25.5-inch scale. Currently set up with like 1046 Diadarian YXL. When this guitar came to me, it was like in horrible state. It was like very deep bow on the neck and so on. And I was afraid it's not gonna work, but the truss rod works super well. I managed to set it up with pretty nice low action. Quite happy how it sounds after cleanup and setup. We have Cosmo black hardware, and because this guitar has been played a lot, the Cosmo suffered a lot. The edges on the tuners are scratched off. Metal rings that hold the pickups, also the tremolo is all tarnished and so on. Knobs actually work pretty well. The end pins I installed brand new because it was lacking when I brought it. They're not actually tarnished in any way, but they don't really neighbor any other hardware, so it's not that painfully visible that they're new and they don't really fit the use of the guitar. The tuners are, I'm pretty sure those are Goto tuners because that's usually what lands in Japanese guitars, but they're not marked with Goto logo, so not sure here. Yeah, we have top lock 3 and the edge tremolo, which together make the double locking system, the very successful combination. We have 2 humbuckers, V7, V8, very standard Ibanez pickups, and 5-way switch. So how does it work? And obviously volume and tone. When we start from the neck, we just have neck position in the 4th position, I think, or wherever it's counted. We have the neck humbucker, but connected parallel, so basically 2 single coils. Gives this more kind of like stratty sound. Here we have just 2 humbuckers connected, so kind of like middle in 3-way switch with double humbucker configuration. Here, position 2 is very interesting because it gives you 1 coil each from each of the humbuckers. And this is like very nice stratty sound. I really like that. I was very surprised to get that from double humbucker configuration. And then we have just a bridge humbucker. Wiring in this guitar, when I received it, was very messed with. Like the tone knob was disconnected. The pot looked suspicious. There looked like there was those kind of like small pots, more common in like Korean guitars. It didn't look right. And I had like a set of pots from like 1991 560, so I just installed those old Japanese pots and rewired it from scratch, and just looks much better inside and just sounds good, sounds the way it should now. Like I don't think pot matters that much in terms of like sound, but I found those like bigger pots much more reliable, and it was also much more like satisfying roll into them, like they're kind of like more feedbacky. Like with most Japanese RGs, we have like 3 cavities in the back, one for the springs of the tremolo. This hatch is lost for this guitar, I don't have it. Then we have like electronics bay and the wiring for the jack, because it's a barrel jack, so it's impossible to wire it without accessing it. So while we're at it, we can talk about condition. There was a sticker here that I like very unskillfully removed. I was like scratching it out with metal ruler without realizing I'm just scratching into the finish. So I made a lot of like deep scratches. They don't touch the wood because the finish is pretty thick poly here, but it looks kind of nasty. I don't know if it's possible to buff it off. Probably, I don't have much experience. There's a lot of other scratches here. There's like a long scratch here, some buckle rush and so on. We have like a finish scratch all the way to the wood, very similar to what happened on the RG320 that I had. So you can see kind of like a plain mahogany here. Corner chips, you know, the whole kind of like piece of clear coat ripped off here and here. Big scratch here, big scratch here. You know, you could see it was played on the stage and hit some things maybe on the stage and so on. But those are mostly cosmetic fix. All the things that are important to work with this guitar. You know, it resonates really nicely. There's no neck damage, no neck joint breakage, no headstock breakage. Electronics works fine, tremolo works fine and in tune. It had a rough life, but we managed to bring it back, and it should serve somebody on the stage for next 10 or 20 years. Cool guitar. A bit too heavy, but otherwise very cool. Very vibey. So I hope you enjoy, you dig into this like quite uncommonly configured RG for that period. I mean, they're not rare by any means, but they're also not as common like 550s or like 570s. And if you did, there's like a button below that video. Please click that. Thank you. And check out other videos on my channel. I have quite a lot of content related to Ibanez, mostly guitars, but I also like to dig into things like tremolos and other things, a bit of history. And see you in another episode of documenting every Ibanez guitar ever made.